this video, we're going to talk a little bit about spacing. And spacing is one of those things where we think about it, but then we get carried away with the other elements, and then we kind of stop thinking about it. And I have just a simple layout here that you would see in a magazine spread, which is very common. This is a 4-column, not as common as you would see, but still, again, trying to utilize the elements in the practices that you've seen. And I have things kind of spaced here so you can evaluate how tight or how not tight you want to make things. So in your images, make sure that you are always providing the necessary space that's needed. So say I needed more space below, and I'm trying to equal out the space below right here at that first image with something similar that's on the right hand side. So I want to adjust that space a little bit more. In this instance, I have the space all the way around, so I want to actually kind of adjust the space the same across. And by doing that, I've created a very similar visual. Now, in this instance, because of the way the columns run, the gaps get kind of strange. And this is one of the issues with trying to run text, through columns of text. You really do have to be careful on how that visual presentation is going to appear. And maybe it sits a little better here, although you end up with some strange effects there. So when you're dealing with spacing, don't just worry about what the spacing is that you've created with the image itself or the graphic itself or the type itself. Make sure you're evaluating how it's working in relationship to other elements, and in this instance the paragraphs of type. In this instance, I would probably just need to adjust the top. I wouldn't have to adjust the bottom, although it will adjust just to kind of move space down. When I'm demonstrating, I have the luxury of being able to remove text to kind of get things to run a little better. But when you're not dealing with that, you may have to adjust the typeface to accommodate that. So don't get stuck on one individual thing. Maybe select a different typeface. In this instance, it's Baskerville, maybe in a different size to have it fill the space. If you're not told that it has to be one particular typeface, make sure you work with a variety of typefaces, especially when you're dealing with paragraphs, to establish that spacing that's going to work out. In this instance too, I could probably pull my overall body down, which includes the image, to give a bit more space to the headline. And now I have a pretty balanced, pretty simple layout that is the text is running nice with the images. The images have nice space. Kind of doing an overall evaluation. If I wanted to equal out my paragraphs a little bit more, maybe I would pull them down just a smidge. Again, I could maybe pull my heading down, give it a little bit more white space around it, and I've balanced out so I don't have an odd end in my paragraph there as well. And again, still having my images run around each other. And time after time I've talked about how you can utilize your typography to give a message, and you don't always have to show all the type. So in this instance, I'm cutting off, because this is running off the page. It's running off the page here and then running off the page here. I'm using that headline, but I'm kind of filling the space. So I'm giving a visual intrigue that there's more to see, there's more to engage with. And that's what that is going to achieve. And that is not a bad thing. It's just utilizing kind of a different vantage point for your elements and utilizing space in a much different way. So I'm kind of going to cut off. If you look here, this would be cut off, and so on and so forth. Oh, I don't want to do that. So you can kind of see where it would, but I'm also making the eye give an appearance that there is more out there. So then when I bring in my text and I get it kind of aligned in there as well, maybe to afford, because I'm going to cut that off and kind of create that visual, I'll give it a little bit more space below to allow the empty space, or the white space as we like to call it, more of a profound effect. And then when you're dealing with your paragraphs, here I just happen to be dealing with a column of 2, but again, deciding that is a decision that comes across in the design. Think about how a full justify gives you the visual that you're looking for as far as the use of space. I think in this instance that this image needs just a bit more space all the way around it. So I'm going to lock them. I'm going to increase it just a little bit more to kind of give it that structure around it. Because of the way the text runs, we don't have a lot of control over that, but we can equal out our spaces on our right and our left to kind of work with the bottom and top. And you don't want to make things so tight. You want to free it up. You want to have a visual that will allow more of a flow, a comfort, less, kind of power to it, especially when you're talking about heavy paragraphs of text. So in this case, I have, this heavy paragraph of text. I want to minimize that heaviness as much as possible. So in this instance, moving to the full justify and changing it to a lighter serif typeface kind of helped alleviate that a little bit more in the space, really allowed me to see the elements as their individual pieces, yet it's working as one whole. And don't forget about a possibility of changing that gutter space. You can increase your gutter space, and that too, and that's the space between the columns, is called the gutter space. That too, that space there actually will allow you to have some good visual representation as well, because now look at, you can come down here, you can go freely around the image, and that image is popping, albeit kind of dead center. I would probably want to adjust it more in one of the directions, probably down, just because, kind of to balance that out a little bit more. In the space, again, you want to make sure you don't create any odd ends to your designs. So it may require that you adjust it a little bit more, so you end up running things a little better. If you can minimize, take some text out. If you can't, you're going to need to play with that game. But you can see now my headline, I made it large, I made it cut off, I gave a sense of out there, yet I allowed it to have some good space below, that good white space below, because I'm cramming it, a sense, that's a bad word, but I am essentially making it retrofit into that space in its entirety and cutting it off, and therefore I have to kind of do some other things to alleviate that. And then I compensated because of that heaviness in a lot more gutter space, a lot more leading, and a lot more space along the image. And then finally, you can, think about it in other terms. So I have a very small headline with, maybe my text running just below it, and putting my images, in here. Remember, we work better in threes. Our eye works better in threes. So, we could do something like this, although you'd want to make sure that you don't cut your text so that it, kind of runs like this. So you have to be careful when you do stuff like that. So 3 may not work. Maybe it's just the 1 for now. And deciding where that image goes to create the overall visual. I've kind of created a streamline, but I've also compensated for the visuals by allowing things to be a little bit smaller and having this huge margin space around it. It's making the eye kind of pull in. You'll notice too that I pulled it down, so it's not starting at the top. That's another key you can do. So many times we want to start at the top and then we end up with space down at the bottom, and that looks a little odd in the use of the space. So if you're going to have your elements and you want to set them off the center, it is having that white space above is acceptable, because that kind of like, oh, shock and awe to draw you in a little bit more. I've kept my headline tight. I kept it aligned. I kept it small. So we're seeing that now as one, bigger piece versus it being piece by piece by piece, and I'm utilizing size and spacing more to figure out how we're going to engage the eye for the user and pull them through the overall design. It's not just about seeing what each individual piece, it's about seeing everything as a whole. And when you see everything as a whole, you tend to take the whole message in, which is what we always try to instill. I'm going to just go ahead and increase my gutter a little bit more to give it space. Again, space is not a bad thing, space is a good thing, but you cannot just expect space to appear. You actually have to design space into your designs and give them as much evaluation and credence in the design as you do the elements themselves. So do not neglect space. Think about how that white space, especially on your margins, will dictate the message, and how the white space around elements will help enhance the element as well as the other elements that it's working with. And once you do that, you're going to achieve a variety of visuals. As you can see, I have a variety of visuals using space in a variety of ways, and trying to assess how that space is going to help and dictate the overall visual will then give you an optimal outcome for the presentation.